Second part of the Greco-Persian Wars. In the first part, we explored the first phase of the wars and parts of the second phase. We also looked at the context of the wars. In this second part, we will continue with the entrancing story. Whilst the pass was being held at Thermopylae by King Leonidas and the men that were with him, a second conflict, just as central and essential to the Greco-Persian Wars, was occurring, this one at sea. It would occur near Evia. The naval contingent that Xerxes had built was massive. But a storm would reduce the numbers of the ships the Persians had been able to amass, doing massive damage to the force that had been prepared for the invasion. The first loss to the Persian forces would happen off the coast of Magnesia. But the calamities at sea would not stop. A second group would be caught as they sailed around the coast of Evia. When the Allies found out about the fate of the ground forces at Thermopylae, they withdrew to Salamis. This occurred after days of conflict that would see losses on both sides. With the Allies retreating, Phocis, Boeotia and Attica would fall to the Persians, who would be able to enter into the walls of Athens. For their retreat the Allies had chosen the island of Salamis. Some Athenians would have been evacuated from Athens to Salamis, the few that remained would offer resistance to the Persians. They would ultimately lose. Now an interesting part of the wars. With the two armies positioned as they were. For Xerxes, his position and ability to force the Allies into surrendering could be reinforced significantly if he was able to defeat the Allies' naval force. For the Allies, staying in the battle as long as possible and deferring their defeat would stop the Persians from achieving their goal. Now looking at the events of the Battle of Salamis, which would be fought in September of 480 BC. Again in the battle, geography, and intelligence, would play a substantial role in gifting a smaller force success. A massive event in the history of the Greco-Persian Wars, and in the history of that time. The battle would end with the Persians having to withdraw from Attica. Themistocles would use the information that he had been able to glean from his involvement at Artemisium to reach an accurate conclusion of a weakness in the Persian navy. Close-quarter battle for the Persian navy was their weakness, and the plan that would be contrived by Themistocles would use this apparent weakness to the hilt. At a point in the course of events Xerxes would call a war meeting, and in it certain individuals would warn him about the risks and disadvantages of attacking the Allies' position. Advice that he would ignore, to his undoing. Added to the information that was privy to Xerxes would be information that Themistocles would purposely add, or allow to filter due to a level of cunning and foresight. Some of it might have included stories of growing disunity between the Allies and their next move, and another could have been the location of the forces. Subterfuge and foresight would be Themistocles' weapon of choice, and the information that he was able to feed Xerxes would ultimately work its way into achieving his goals. Xerxes would dispatch his fleet. The numbers on the Persian side would be overwhelming. And tactically their position was stronger. All they had to do was probably wait to play their hand, but many factors would push them into acting as they did, including a desire to conclude the invasion, and the knowledge that staying there with such a force as large as his was not something they could sustain for an extremely protracted period. Some of the events and facts of the actual day of battle cannot be claimed with absolute certainty. At some point it seems the Persians would turn back and retreat. After the battle, a council of war would be held. Xerxes, perceiving the possibility that his army might find itself marooned in Europe if the Greeks had chosen to target Hellespont. The bulk of the army was withdrawn, leaving Mardonius with some of the troops to complete the effort at invasion. When they withdrew from Athens, the Athenians would be able to retake it, but at some point in the future they would lose it once again to the Persians. But the Battle of Salamis had already gone some way into creating doubt in the Persians, and weakening their position. The Battle of Salamis would be remembered as an important point in the course of the wars, and an important part of history. After the battle, a stalemate would result, With neither side wanting to attack the other for a while, Mardonius would send an offer to the Athenians, which was rejected, the Athenians preferring freedom. With the offer refused, the Persians made their move, reoccupying Athens, and again sending an offer. The Athenians would look for assistance from Sparta, and Sparta would deploy a force. The episode that follows would further cement the fate of the Persians, and further strengthen the position that the Allies would now have. The Battle of Mycale and the Battle of Plataea 479 BC. The Greek army would make an aggressive move to march out, causing the Persian army's retreat. Fortified camp would be made by the Persians on the bank of the Asopus River. But the Greeks would decide against further progress. The position they held was higher and to their advantage. The Persians would attempt several times to change this, and get the Greeks to cede this advantage. The Greeks would attempt to retreat to another location when their supply was interrupted, and their access to water was hampered. The Allies' retreat would be filled with chaos and mistakes, and the Persians would follow them as they retreated. But some forces from the Allies would stand ground, and the battle would prove successful for the Greek allies. Mardonius would pass away in the battle. A few Persians would flee, then more and more joined until it was a general retreat. Storming the Persian camp would be a step taken by the Greek side. Being able to break through eventually, a lot of the Persians contained within would perish. Few would be left to live. The victory here at Plataea would be massive. The Battle of Mycale would see the Allies emerge triumphant as well. With the Persian ships in poor state, the Persians initially chose to remain out of the fray, choosing to put their ships to land, and protect them. But the Allies would attack, and win. Thus the Persian ships would be set to the flame. An important step towards further weakening the position of the Persians. The Persians would retreat, losing many men along the way. Some would fall to the enemies, some to sheer exhaustion. And furthermore to privation and hunger. A new era was born which would see a new tide set in, and the fate of the Greek world take a new direction. Thank you for listening to this podcast.